Thinking of exiting your business or taking on a private equity partner to help you grow faster? BizNexus has you covered. Tap into our network of thousands of best-fit investors, acquirers, and proven M&A advisors, and we'll help you begin the relationship confidentially on your terms, your timeline. Learn more at biznexus.com.
Disclaimer from the always present legal team. Podcast conversations don't necessarily reflect the views of BizNexus Incorporated. Everything you hear is informational news and updates from around the industry. We're not recommending any investments. We're not offering any investment advice. Be sure to do your own homework.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We're all about getting to the point, right? Cutting through the noise and getting right to what matters. Today, we're diving headfirst into something that really caught our eye.
Yeah, this one's big. The Small Business Administration, the SBA, is undergoing a pretty dramatic reorganization. And we're not talking about a little reshuffling here.
Not at all. This is a full-on system reboot, and we need to unpack it. We've been digging into some sources that lay out exactly what the SBA is proposing and why.
Exactly. And that's what we're here to do today. Unpack the reasoning behind this, see how they're planning to make these changes, and explore what this might mean for small businesses out there, especially those in that lower middle market space that we always like to keep an eye on.
Right on target. Now, anytime an agency as impactful as the SBA makes a move like this, the first question has to be, why?
Absolutely. Got to understand the motivations.
And the SBA, they're very upfront about their reasoning. They're saying they want to eliminate unnecessary spending, get back to the core mission of supporting small businesses, and make sure everything's accountable to the taxpayer. Those are the big three they're putting forward.
Three pretty hefty goals for sure.
No doubt. So where do we start? It seems like this whole reorganization is really about reversing the growth the SBA saw during the previous administration.
Yeah, that's a key piece of the puzzle. According to the information we've been looking at, the SBA practically doubled in size since the pandemic.
Wow, doubled. That's huge.
Yeah, a big jump. And this move seems very much geared towards slimming back down, getting back to the size it was pre-pandemic.
So what drove all that growth in the first place? What were those key drivers?
Well, they specifically call out a few things, programs like the Green Lender Initiative, the Community Navigator Pilot Program, and then, of course, all the DEI activities that were ramped up.
So the argument is that these programs, while well-intentioned, maybe took the SBA a bit too far afield from its traditional focus.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. The announcement actually goes a step further. It claims that this expansion ended up hurting the SBA's services and its financial performance. Like, by trying to do too much, they weren't doing their main job effectively anymore.
That's a pretty bold claim. It seems like they're tying that to some serious financial worries too, right?
Oh yeah, big time. There's this big figure they keep throwing around, a staggering estimate of $200 billion allegedly lost to fraud through the PPP and the EIDL program. And the suggestion is that this potential fraud was just sort of ignored during that big expansion period.
$200 billion. That's a hard number to wrap your head around. Does the announcement say anything about the kinds of fraud that happened, any specific details? Or are they talking about any systemic weaknesses that this reorganization is supposed to fix?
Well, they don't really get into the specifics of the fraud itself, but there's a clear emphasis on bringing risk management under one roof. Like, centralizing it within the chief financial officer's office. Seems like they're acknowledging that the old decentralized system might have had some vulnerabilities, especially for those programs.
Right, makes sense. And it wasn't just those pandemic-era programs they were worried about, was it? There was something about the 7A loan program, too. Could you give our listener a quick rundown of what that program's all about?
Sure. So the 7A program, it's kind of the bread and butter of the SBA. It's how they help small businesses get loans. They basically guarantee loans from private lenders, making it easier for businesses to access the capital they need for all sorts of things, like working capital, buying equipment, real estate, that kind of thing.
Got it. A fundamental program then. And the announcement seems to suggest it had some problems too.
Yeah, they used this phrase, irresponsible Biden-era changes, claiming these changes caused a worrying rise in defaults and delinquencies, and even saying that the program went into negative cash flow for the first time in over a decade. Pretty alarming stuff. They're suggesting that these trends could jeopardize the whole program in the long run.
Wow, that's serious. Do they mention any specific changes to the 7A program that they think led to these problems? Like did they loosen eligibility criteria or something?
They don't really get into the nitty-gritty of those policy changes. But the overall narrative they're painting is that lending standards were probably loosened and that maybe the program expanded in a way that made it riskier.
Interesting. So big picture, we've got this massive expansion, a bunch of new initiatives, and then, according to this announcement, some pretty big financial consequences. All right, let's shift gears a bit and look at the how. How are they actually planning to address these issues with this reorganization?
The biggest change, by far, is the personnel cut. They're looking at a 43% reduction in the workforce.
43%, that's a massive cut.
Yeah, massive. It means about 2,700 people out of a workforce of almost 6,500 are going to lose their jobs.
How do you even begin to make a cut that big?
Well, they've got a few ways they're planning to do it. They're encouraging people to resign voluntarily, letting term appointments expire naturally. Or a lot of those were pandemic related, And then if they need to, they'll do what they call reductions in force, RIFs.
RIFs, that's got to be tough. But I guess a workforce reduction like that would save a lot of money, right?
Oh, yeah. They're projecting annual savings of over $435 million by fiscal year 2026. For context, they say the average SBA employee makes over $132,000 a year.
Okay, so a much leaner budget. That's a big change.
Yeah.
But what about the resources they do have left? How are they planning to use them? What are the big shifts in their approach going forward?
There are a few key things they're focusing on. First, they want to really beef up their capital formation functions, put more people and resources into that area. Makes sense, right? It goes hand in hand with their emphasis on getting back to that core mission of providing access to capital.
Absolutely. Capital access is crucial for any small business, especially in those early stages.
Exactly. And then, as we talked about before, they're bringing all that risk management and fraud prevention stuff under one roof. Centralizing it within the Office of the Chief Financial Officer seems like a direct response to those concerns about the PPP and EIDL programs.
Yeah, after those fraud allegations, centralizing risk management seems like a pretty obvious move. What else are they changing up?
Well, they're also revamping how they handle disaster response. The plan is to move all the disaster loan servicing and the staff handling that over to the Office of Disaster Recovery and Resilience. And they're going to be cross-training field office staff to help out with disaster recovery efforts, too. Could make their response more coordinated and efficient when those disasters hit.
Cross-training field staff for disaster support. That sounds like a really efficient use of resources. What about those pandemic-era positions we were talking about earlier? What's happening with those?
Gone. They're getting rid of them. They specifically mention redundant pandemic-era positions in the Office of Capital Access, mostly related to processing those pandemic loans. Basically, as those programs wind down, they don't need as many people working on them anymore.
Makes sense. We've talked a lot about centralizing things. Are they doing anything to decentralize, to better serve those small businesses at the local level?
Actually, yes. A big part of this reorganization is making sure they have a strong presence in those local communities. They want 30% of their workforce to be based in field offices. The goal is to have more SBA staff out there on the ground, right on Main Street, where they can connect with small business owners directly and provide more personalized support.
Yeah, that local connection can be so valuable for those small business owners who need guidance and support. It's more than just paperwork and websites.
For sure. And they're also making it clear that they're not abandoning certain sectors that are particularly important to small business, like veteran-owned businesses and manufacturing.
Those are vital parts of the small business ecosystem.
Absolutely. The announcement specifically says that they're keeping the staffing levels the same for the Office of Veterans Business Development and the Office of Manufacturing and Trade. So they're still committed to supporting those businesses.
Good to hear. It's also encouraging that they're keeping some of the oversight functions in place too, right?
Definitely. They're protecting the Office of Advocacy, which is like the independent voice for small businesses within the government. And they're not touching the Office of the Inspector General either, at least not for now. That's the office that audits and investigates the SBA's programs. So even with all these changes, they're still emphasizing accountability and making sure things are being done right.
So taking a step back, it looks like this whole reorganization boils down to streamlining operations and getting back to what they see as the SBA's fundamental purpose. A back-to-basics kind of approach.
That's a great way to put it. They're really hammering home this idea of returning to the SBA's founding mission. Over and over again, they talk about getting back to those core functions, providing capital, supporting innovation, helping veteran-owned businesses, working directly with businesses in the field, and delivering disaster relief quickly and effectively. They're basically saying that the agency strayed from that core focus and needs to get back on track.
And SBA Administrator Kelly Loeffler, her statement in this announcement really drives that point home.
She doesn't mince words, that's for sure. She says the SBA has veered off track and turned into a sprawling leviathan. That's quite an image.
Yeah, definitely paints a picture. And she specifically calls out what she sees as mission creep, financial mismanagement, and waste. She argues that the SBA got too focused on pushing a partisan political agenda and lost sight of its responsibility to serve small businesses effectively.
And she's very clear about her goals. She wants to bring the SBA's staffing back down to the level it was at during the previous administration and make sure their priorities are on promoting private sector growth and providing efficient disaster relief. It's a pretty clear signal that they intend to take the agency in a whole new direction.
Okay, so lots of change on the horizon. But in the middle of all this upheaval, the announcement does try to reassure everyone that the essential services will stay intact. They explicitly state that loan guarantees, disaster assistance programs, field operations, and programs for veterans will not be affected.
Yeah, it's important for people to hear that. Of course, only time will tell how things actually play out.
Yeah.
But it sounds like they're trying to minimize disruption to those core services.
Oh, right, that makes sense. Now let's bring this back to our listeners who, as you know, are often particularly interested in the lower middle market. How do you think these changes at the SBA might impact that segment of the business landscape?
That's a great question. Well, while they're not rolling out any specific programs just for the lower middle market, the idea is that if the SBA is more efficient and focused overall, everyone benefits, including those lower middle market businesses.
Right, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Exactly. If they can really improve those core functions, making it easier to get capital, creating an environment where small businesses can thrive, that helps everyone within that small business definition, and that includes the lower middle market. A more streamlined, more accountable SBA could mean better resources and more effective support for those businesses, which are so crucial to our economy.
They are the backbone, really, and access to capital, a stable environment, those are things every business needs to grow, especially in that lower middle market space.
Absolutely. Those are the foundations. And those are the areas this reorganization is really emphasizing.
So let's wrap this up with a quick recap. The SBA is going through a major reorganization. They want to reverse the expansion of recent years, address those big financial concerns we talked about, and get back to focusing on what they see as their fundamental mission.
Exactly. A big part of that is a huge reduction in their workforce. They're also shifting resources around to support those core functions they're emphasizing.
And it all boils down to a pretty fundamental difference in philosophy about the SBA's role, right? Should they be involved in a wide range of social and economic programs, or should they stick to those traditional business support functions? That's the big question at the heart of this.
It is. And that's something for our listeners to think about. How might these changes at the SBA impact the resources your businesses depend on? Will it be easier or harder to access the support you need? And how will this shift back to those core missions, as opposed to a broader agenda, shape the landscape for entrepreneurs in the years to come? Those are big questions. This is a significant change, and it's worth paying close attention to how it all unfolds.
Lots to ponder. Thanks for breaking this down with us today. And to our listeners, as always, stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll see you back here on The Deep Dive.
Acquiring a business? BizNexus simplifies it. Access thousands of updated opportunities in our DIY marketplace or supercharge team sourcing with OmniSource, your all-in-one platform for on-market, off-market, and coming-soon deals. Scale smarter today. Learn more or book a demo at www.biznexus.com.